In this Warmaster video we take a look at the army list updates for 2025. The updated army lists are free to download from Alish Navratil's website and will also appear in the Warmaster journal. Each year the Warmaster community suggests changes to the army lists which players believe will improve the game. These suggestions can be viewed on the experimental forum. Members of the Warmaster Rules Committee may take ideas from this forum and turn them into proposals, although committee members will also come up with their own proposals themselves. These proposals are then discussed at length by the Rules Committee, and the best ideas are seconded and put forward to a vote. A proposed rule change must achieve a 2/3 majority in favour for it to succeed, and a more detailed explanation as to how this process works can be found on the Experimental Rules forum. The first army to receive a minor change this year is the Empire. An issue that was raised was how to make the Empire infantry line slightly more resilient, so that you can avoid relying on knights and cannons every time you play. Well, the Empire list does have a mechanism for making their infantry more survivable, and that is through the addition of skirmisher stands. Therefore, this year skirmishers have received a 5-point discount to promote their usage in the list. The next army to receive a change this year are the Orcs. This year the proposal surrounded wolf chariots, which are rarely seen on the battlefield due to their fragility. Therefore, in order to promote their usage, wolf chariots have received a 5-point discount this year. Next, it's the High Elves that have received a change this year. High Elves are currently perceived as one of the easiest Warmaster armies to play, and also very competitive at tournaments thanks to their Command 10 General and their access to unlimited heavy cavalry. In order to rein in the power of an all-cavalry High Elf list, the number of silver helms available per 1,000 points has been capped at 3. There was also a proposal to introduce an army-wide special rule for the High Elves. The effect of this rule would be that the army counts their breakpoint as 1 lower than normal, which would force the player to pick less expensive unit choices to keep their breakpoint high. In exchange, the High Elf General would have been reduced to 155 points. However, this year the vote failed by a single vote, and more playtesting evidence is required next year to see how this rule might work in practice. So if you like the idea of this rule, why not try it out for yourself and report your findings back to the Rules Committee. Next up, it's the Dwarf Army. A feeling amongst dwarf players is that, with the exception of troll slayers, their infantry struggle to generate a lot of attacks going forwards, and also struggle against terrifying enemies. In addition to this, the dwarf hero is completely overshadowed by the runesmith option, who is simply a better version of the hero. Therefore, to address these issues and promote the usage of the dwarf hero in the list, we have added a dwarf hero upgrade option called the Oathstone. This is a one-use only upgrade for 15 points. To use the Oathstone, the hero must join a unit of infantry which cannot be troll slayers. The effects last until the end of the current combat phase, and grant +1 attack to the hero and every stand of the unit he has joined. In addition to this, the unit counts as being immune to terror. The thinking behind this upgrade is to give the dwarves a reliable option to counter terror and to dig enemies out of defendable terrain, while simultaneously promoting the use of the hero in the list. Next up, it's the Scaven Army list. This year the Scaven received the most ideas for changes to the army list, 8 in total. Of these 8 ideas, 5 were proposed by the Rules Committee and 4 received seconds. These 4 ideas were voted on by the Rules Committee and 3 of them passed the vote. The 3 changes that will be implemented this year are a clarification of the wording for the Grey Seer, a clarification of the wording for the Screaming Bell, and a new character mount, the Rat Ogre Bodyguard. The change to the Grey Seer simply clarifies that they are entitled to take magic items restricted to both the General and a Wizard. The Screaming Bell has had a base size change. It is now based upon a 40 by 60mm base facing the short edge. This has the dual effect of allowing it to fit more neatly within a large brigade of Scaven infantry, and also allows it to touch more Scaven infantry units, granting them terror immunity. The Rat Ogre Bodyguard upgrade is a simple character mount that grants +1 attack. So this finally gives the Scaven hero a small combat multiplier, which justifies sending them into melee. The proposal which failed the vote this year was the introduction of a new unit to the Scaven Army, those being weapon teams as a single stand skirmisher unit attached to clan rats only. Weapon teams are useless in combat but do add 3 shooting attacks at 15cm range with the armor piercing rule. The concept of this unit is that they would be placed at the front of a column of clan rats to deter enemy charges through overwhelming firepower. However, as this concept is so new, further playtesting is required to prove whether it is a needed addition to the army or not. The next army to receive some changes are the Lizardmen. This year the Lizardmen have received 2 rules clarifications over the wording of their units. The Stegodon mount for the Slan Mage Priest has had its number of attacks changed from +5 to +3. The previous wording for this character mount stated that the Slan Mage Priest lost 2 attacks for removing his palanquin and gained 5 attacks for mounting the Stegodon. It was felt to be far simpler to say that the Slan Mage Priest retains his +2 attacks and simply adds 3 for the Stegodon, for the same total of 5. Meanwhile, the wording for the Stegodon unit has been aligned with that of all other large-based creatures, including the Screaming Bell. The next change is to the Breton Army list. And this change relates to the wording for the base size of the Trebuchet, which has the same wording as other large-based units. Next up, it's Kizv. To promote the use of a combined arms approach in the Kizv army, the Bowmen unit has had a special rule change to state that you may substitute up to 1 unit of Axemen for a unit of Bowmen for every 1000 points. This now brings Kizv in line with other similar armies such as Empire, Dwarfs and Chaos Dwarfs, who can also substitute their basic missile troops for their basic combat troops. This year the Demon Army has also received some rules changes. The Demon Army had 2 proposals this year, one of which passed the vote. The first proposal concerns the Instability special rule and the spell Summon Demons, both of which allow you to return a stand to a damaged unit. This clarification simply states that any stand returned to a unit must be placed so that it faces the same way as the stands that it joins. And this rule has been implemented to prevent players from setting up advantageous pursuits or advances which they would not otherwise be allowed to do. The proposal which failed the vote was a change to the profile of Demon Hounds. This proposal suggested that Demon Hounds should have their stats changed to those of Komainu from the Nippon list or Direwolves from the Vampire list. However, the feeling was that this was a bit too much of a nerf to the unit and more playtesting is required to prove its worth. Next up, it's the Goblin Army. This year the Goblins have received the same change as the Orc Army, and this is a 5-point discount to the Wolf Chariot unit, which is of far more value to the Goblin Army than it is to the Orc Army. Hopefully this will encourage Goblin players to try a more aggressive build instead of relying upon the defensive artillery build most often seen. The next army to receive a proposal were the Chaos Dwarfs. The proposal was to restore previous artillery limits to the army, in that players could select 2 out of the 3 choices per 1000 points, but these could be any 2, from Earthshakers, Death Rockets and Bolt Throwers. However, as the Chaos Dwarf restrictions on artillery had only been reimposed last year, this was felt to be too much of a change after too little evidence, and also seemed rather inconsistent, therefore the vote failed. The next army to receive a change are the Beastmen. This year the ambush rule for Gore and Ungor has been clarified. From now on, ambushing units must place all their stands within a full pace move of the first stand deployed in ambush, and if the ambushers are deploying out of dense terrain, then all stands must be partially within that terrain. And this is to prevent ambushing brigades from deploying in unrealistic spaghetti lines far away from their initial ambush point. The Norse Army is next. And this year the Norse Army has received 2 changes. The first change concerns units of Ulfwerner, who are perceived to be slightly overcosted compared to similar statted units. Therefore, to promote their usage in the army, Ulfwerner have received a 5-point discount. And secondly, the special rules for the War Mammoth now clarify that it's on a 40 by 60mm base facing the short edge, bringing it in line with the Stegodon and the Screaming Bell. The next change is to the Nippon Army list. And again, the wording for the replacement of stands gained through a roll on the instability table has been streamlined with that of the Demon Army list to prevent odd placing of restored stands which could be used to gain advantageous pursuits or advances. The next rule change concerns all armies that can take giants. This concerns the Giant Goes Wild table and confirms that when a giant enters combat as a result of a roll on the Giant Goes Wild table, it does count as charging. In addition, if the giant throws a rock at a unit engaged in combat, then any hits inflicted will carry over for the combat result. The final change to the army lists is the addition to the Regiments of Renown table for the armies of Cathay and Nippon. So you can finally take your old world mercenaries into the Far East. This now concludes the agreed changes to the Warmaster army lists for 2025, and you'll see that the majority of changes are quite minor in nature. This is entirely deliberate, as the Rules Committee is keen not to impose changes for the sake of change. Instead, the focus is to correct perceived issues that have been identified by the Warmaster player community and hopefully are supported by a wealth of discussion and playtest evidence. And I'd like to take this opportunity to personally thank those members of the Warmaster player community who have taken the time to engage with the Rules Committee by way of the experimental forum. As always, all of these changes are free to download from the Warmaster Revolution website. We're now going to look at some experimental rules that have been published this year by the author of the Warmaster Compendium, Alish Navratil. The first experimental change is a further reduction in the points values of certain magic items. For example, the Sword of Destruction is proposed to cost only 5 points, and all the magic banners have had their points values further reduced as well. A big change is that the effects of certain banners no longer expire after 1 round of combat or as soon as the unit loses its first stand. Instead, once the unit does lose its first stand, you roll a dice, and the banner's effects are only removed on the roll of 1 or 2. You repeat this process when the unit loses a further stand. In addition, the armour value of the unit further influences the cost of the banner, to better represent the chance of the unit losing it when it loses a stand. The intention of these changes is to allow players to better represent elite units from existing unit types within their army list. So by making magic banners more affordable and potentially last much longer, players now have the opportunity to at last represent the elite units they always wanted. The next experimental change is a clarification of the advanced terrain rules. Terrain is now split into distinct types, being open terrain, rough terrain, difficult terrain, impassable terrain, broken terrain and dense terrain. The type of terrain restricts which type of unit may enter it and may impose further modifiers such as defended status or -1 to command. If you want to try these new rules out, make sure you check the wording thoroughly, as some terrain types have changed in terms of which units may now enter them and what effects they have. The next experimental change is the alteration of several scenarios from the rulebook. There are now 3 extra scenarios called Spoils of War, At All Costs and Blood and Honour, and some Warmaster players may recognise these scenarios from tournaments they may have attended. Yet another experimental change is to the wording of the siege rules. So take a moment to familiarise yourself with these changes, as their intention is to clear up any anomalies in the siege rules and to improve the layout to make it much clearer. And once again, all of these experimental rules are available for download for free from Alish's website, so please take the time to try them out and report back on your playtest evidence. You can find a link to the website where you can download all this information for free attached to this video. And once again, for those players that don't wish to reprint the entire copy of their army list book, don't worry. All the changes mentioned to the army lists that have been voted on and implemented this year will be available in the Warmaster Journal for 2025. And also bear in mind that the experimental changes to the rules in the Compendium are just that. They're experiments at this time for playtesting. And there is no intention to reprint the Compendium for at least a year or two.